There have been calls by some for the public to contact me and my office in an attempt to influence my decision-making in this case. This has been extraordinarily disruptive for court staff. It's also highly inappropriate. Court is not supposed to, and this court will never, take into account public sentiment regarding its judicial decisions. I ask that you not continue to mount such campaigns. The elected prosecutor is the sole authority in deciding what charges to pursue, as well as what penalties to ask for. This court cannot require the prosecutor to seek the death penalty, nor would it be appropriate for this court to attempt to do that. I have not read any of the numerous messages, nor listened to any of the numerous voicemails. Those have all been forwarded to security and, where appropriate, to law enforcement.
Well, I will say, we have no intention of calling all the family members. We have the intention of calling a few of the family members who serve certain purposes. I can't think of a reason that we couldn't. Obviously, it's not ideal. It's completely out of context. It's out of order.
This is like a gumbo. You are going to put all the pieces that go into that into the pot. And at the end of the day, the jury's going to decide whether it's a good soup or not. From the state's perspective. And so I think we get too obsessively stuck on the idea of exactly the order these things need to come in, right? And so I'm not sure why you couldn't call the family members you need up front, and then we take away this concern. I can certainly understand from the defense perspective the need and desire to have the defendant's support family here in the court.
2nd July 2025, a date that is now written forever in the history of true crime in America. Bryan Kohberger, a name people knew only as a suspect, said himself in court today, guilty. Kohberger stood in the courtroom wearing a suit, absolutely calm. There was no guilt, no regret on his face. Judge Stephen Hippler questioned him separately on each charge, and Kohberger, without any hesitation, said every time, guilty. When he made this confession, there was a dead silence in the courtroom. There were tears in the eyes of the victim families, but that was not relief. That was an absolute justice, in which there was no answer. The court made it clear, this guilty plea is a legal agreement. In exchange for the death penalty, Kohberger will get life imprisonment without parole, 4 different life sentences, plus 10 years for burglary. What does that mean? He will never come out again. No appeal, no parole, no mercy. But the biggest impact of this plea was that there would be no trial now. And when there was no trial, there would be no cross-examination. Whatever motive the killer had in his mind, it will never come out in front of the court. So yes, Bryan Kohberger said guilty, but he never told why. And perhaps this why is the biggest pain in this case. Why did Bryan Kohberger take a guilty plea? Was it a strategy or pressure? Was it a strategy or was he cornered? When Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilt, the biggest question that arises is why? Did he really admit his crime? Or was it just a calculated move, a game plan? If we look at the timeline of the entire case, Kohberger and his lawyers tried to delay the trial from the very beginning. First, a motion was filed that media coverage was creating bias. Then it was said that Kohberger has autism spectrum disorder, so he is not eligible for the death penalty. At one point, they even argued that the DNA evidence was collected illegally. But Judge Stephen Hippler rejected all these arguments. The court clearly said, the evidence is strong, the trial will take place on time, and the death penalty is also on the table. And this was that moment when the defense team realized that now nothing was left. The evidence against Kohberger was not just circumstantial, it was direct. The sheath of a combat knife several times on which Kohberger's DNA was found. Phone records, which were tracking his movements multiple times around the crime scene. his white Hyundai Elantra, which was recorded in surveillance on the night of the crime. Despite being a criminal justice student, Kohberger could not escape this trap. So when he realized that going to trial would mean a death sentence, then he cut the deal. He received immunity from the death penalty in exchange for a guilty plea, but his condition was no appeals, no parole, life imprisonment till death. Legal experts say it was a tactical surrender. A surrender in which a person saves himself from total annihilation, but does not accept anything emotionally. And the scariest part? Despite saying guilty in the courtroom, there was no emotion on Bryan Kohberger's face, no remorse, no guilt, no grief. So was it really a surrender, or was it just a cold, calculated move so that he remained alive and the control remained in his hands? No one has an answer, but this much is certain. This guilty plea is a shortcut to justice, but it can also be the graveyard of truth. Reaction of victim families, closure or anger. The first thing that made headlines outside the courtroom after Bryan Kohberger's guilty plea was the reaction of the victim families. 4 families, 4 children, 4 different emotions. Ethan Chapin's family hid their pain and said, "We're grateful this is over. We don't have to hear the details. We can begin to heal." Madison Mogan and Zana Knodl's loved ones also called the plea a peaceful closure. But it was not that simple. Kaylee Goncalves' family, especially her father, Steve Goncalves, were furious as they left the courtroom. He said, "The killer got mercy, but he did not give even a moment to my daughter." Kaylee's sister Aubrey wrote an emotional open letter in which she said, "The system gave us silence, not justice." That letter went viral. She wrote that this plea deal is another trauma for them, because they will never know the motive. And when Steve Goncalves publicly announced that he is returning the $85,000 trial support fund that he had raised from the people, then the whole America was shocked for once. His message was clear. If the trial doesn't happen, then what should I do with that money? I wanted answers, not punishment. This guilty plea was peace for some families, and for some, there was another knife, this time in his heart. What was lost due to cancellation of trial? Something else was quietly killed along with Bryan Kohberger's guilty confession, the trial. Yes, now the evidence will not be shown to the jurors in any courtroom. There will be no witness cross-examined. There will be no forensic reconstruction. No one will be asked why. And in this silence, the truth has been sacrificed the most. Legal experts know the trial is not just a means of punishment. It is a public record, a space where every angle, every motive, every doubt is openly discussed. In this case, Kohberger's motive has not been officially disclosed yet. Did the victims already know? Was it jealous, obsession, revenge, or a cold-blooded psychological thrill? Now we will never know. When the trial happened, the FBI, forensic experts, and digital analysts would all present their data in the courtroom. Then we might have known that Kohberger had made a plan beforehand, how he would target which victim, how he would avoid CCTV coverage, and what his behavior was after the crime. But now, after the guilty plea, all this will be sealed. The files will be closed, and a story that the world should understand will remain hidden. This isn't just a legal closure, it's a narrative collapse. The evidence that shattered Kohberger? You must be wondering, why did an intelligent PhD student like Kohberger take a guilty plea? What was there against him that forced him? Let's see. What was the hardcore forensic proof? The first biggest proof was a single-bar combat knife sheath found at the crime scene. Kohberger's DNA was on it. Clean match, no doubt. Dusra proof. Cell tower data. Kohberger's mobile was activated near the crime scene 12 times before the crime, especially around 3 o'clock in the night. Tisra, Hyundai Elantra. His car was seen multiple times in the crime night surveillance footage. Speed change, return patterns, everything was with the FBI. Fourth, trash DNA match. The FBI took DNA from his father's trash and matched it. Pure genetic confirmation. First, his online behavior. He was a criminology student. He did research on patterns of serial killers. He posted anonymous questions on Reddit. How did you feel after killing someone? Type. Everything together. The case that was made against Kohberger was airtight. He had no alibi, no explanation. That's why legal experts say this guilty plea was not regret. It was survival instinct, a deal to stay alive in jail. But the irony is this. A person like Kohberger considered the system to be a game, and when he lost the game, he took a shortcut and put the truth in the grave. Courtroom conversation between the judge and Kohberger. The 2nd of July 2025. There was a deep silence in courtroom number 3 in Latah County, Idaho. Judge Stephen Hippler sat on his bench. His face was serious, but clear. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on Bryan Kohberger, a PhD criminology student, now a confessed killer. The judge looked straight at him and began reading out charges one by one. Mr. Kohberger, you are charged with the murder of Kaylee Goncalves. How do you plead? Kohberger took a small glance toward his defense attorney, then looked at the judge and gave a straight answer. Guilty, Your Honor. Then the judge asked, you are also charged with the murder of Madison Mogan. How do you plead? Kohberger repeated the same thing again. Guilty. While doing this, the judge read out the names of the 4 murder victims, Ethan Chapin, Zana Knodler, and Kohberger gave the same answer each time without any expression. Guilty. Judge Hippler said another important line after that. Are you entering this plea voluntarily, Mr. Kohberger? Has anyone threatened you or promised you anything in exchange for this plea? Kohberger immediately said, no, Your Honor, I'm doing this voluntarily. Then the judge asked, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you waive your right to a trial by jury? Bryan calmly replied, yes, Your Honor. There was a pin-drop silence in the courtroom. Neither the press broke its silence, nor the families spoke out. Everybody heard it. Every word, every sentence. Judge finally declared, the court accepts your plea of guilty. You will be sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus 10 years for burglary. No appeals will be permitted. This case is now closed. And then, in that moment, Kohberger's entire case was turned. There will be no public trial, no questioning, no cross-examination. Just a cold courtroom confession. Lifetime imprisonment. But during that entire hearing, Kohberger did not show any remorse even once. No tears in his eyes, no fear in his voice, just short, robotic answers, as if he was solving MQs of some exam. This moment was not just a legal procedure. It was a living proof of the terrifying silence hidden inside a human being. Bryan Kohberger pleaded guilty, but there was no explanation for his guilty plea. There was no apology. There was no reason. Most important part of their story, why, was never revealed. The families put up the facade of closure, but their truth is this. Justice was done, but the truth was buried alive. This guilty plea cancelled America's biggest trial. The mic of truth was never turned on. And Kohberger? He will now spend his life in prison with his cold silence. No remorse, no answers, nor humanity. So the question is not whether Bryan Kohberger confessed. The question is, did he ever think about what he did? And if the answer is no, then perhaps this case will remain unfinished forever. Justice delivered, truth denied, silence forever. I hope to meet all of you with the same true crime and thriller crime case in the next video, and if you found this video informative but liked it even a little bit, then do subscribe to my channel and definitely select the notification bell on all.
In biology class we had the usual of fetal pigs, and I took the remains of that home and kept the skin. And I just started branching out, dogs, cats. I suppose it could have turned into a normal hobby like taxidermy. And all I know is that I wanted to see what the insides of these animals looked like. There may have been some violence involved, some underlying subconscious feelings of violence.
I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography. There's no question about it. The FBI's own study on serial homicide shows that the most common interest among serial killers is pornography.
That's true.
And it's real. It's true.
The person to blame is sitting right across from you. That's the only person. Not parents, not society, not pornography. I mean, those are just excuses.
What do you think about what he said about pornography?
Pornography? I've been looking at it all my life and it hasn't affected me anything.
A person whose home's fridge was filled not just with food, but with dead bodies. A story which does not end after the murder, it only begins then. This is not just the story of a killer. This is the journey of a monster who survived by hiding the deaths of 17 people behind the mask of a normal boy. This is the story of Jeffrey Dahmer, a name which has been written among the most deadly serial killers of America, a hunting devil who not only killed the corpses of his victims, but preserved their body parts, ate them, and kept their pictures with them. From 1978 to 1991, this man killed 17 young boys, one after the other. But his first murder, that was the most horrifying because a monster was born on that day. So let's start from the day that started a story written in blood in American history. June 18th, 1978. Jeffrey Dahmer's first murder. Starting date, time, year of crime involved. It all began on June 18th, 1978. A warm summer evening in Bath Township, Ohio. The sun was setting when a young Jeffrey Dahmer spotted his first victim, 18-year-old hitchhiker, Stephen Hicks. Dahmer, just 18 himself, had recently graduated high school, but instead of heading off to college parties or finding a summer job, he drove straight into darkness. At around 5:30 p.m., he picked up Hicks, offering him a ride, a few beers, and a place to chill. By 7 p.m., Hicks was dead, bludgeoned with a dumbbell, strangled and hidden in the basement. This was no accident. It was the beginning of a chilling reign of terror that would stretch over 13 years and claim 17 innocent lives. And that very night, something inside Jeffrey Dahmer broke. Permanently.
Who was the killer? The name? Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. But the world remembers him as the Milwaukee Cannibal, a soft-spoken, polite man with a monster hiding behind his glasses. To neighbors, he was shy and quiet. To his victims, he was death itself. He didn't kill for revenge, money, or hate. He killed because he wanted full control. Control over bodies, over life, over death. He lured young men with offers of cash or photo shoots only to murder them brutally. And then, he kept their remains, sometimes for weeks. He wasn't just a killer, he was a collector, a manipulator, a wolf in sheep's clothing. But every monster has an origin. So where did Jeffrey's madness begin? Killer's real name and early life. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21st, 1960, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His father, Lionel, was a chemist, and his mother, Joyce, struggled with anxiety and depression. From the outside, the Dahmers looked like a normal middle-class family, but behind closed doors, fights, emotional distance, and a child growing colder by the day, Jeffrey was fascinated with dead animals. He'd collect roadkill and store the bones. At just 6 years old, he began showing signs of detachment. His only joy came from anatomy books and taxidermy kits. By the time he turned 10, he was already fantasizing about controlling others, about what it would feel like to own a body. But childhood obsession soon turned into something far darker. Killer's mental health and childhood trauma. Jeffrey's mind was a storm from early on. His mother's frequent hospitalizations and emotional instability left him craving attention. But instead of love, he found isolation. His father, though intelligent, was emotionally distant. Jeffrey was left alone with his thoughts that turned darker with time. He developed fantasies of complete domination, sexual, violent, disturbing. He began drinking in high school, sometimes even bringing alcohol to class. Teachers noticed, but no one intervened. He admitted later that he felt like something was missing. That missing piece? He tried to fill it with death. Diagnosed later with borderline personality disorder and schizotypal traits, Jeffrey was not insane, just broken beyond repair. And what happens when a broken mind meets the opportunity to kill? It begins. When, where, and how did the first murder happen? It was June 18th, 1978. Jeffrey Dahmer had been left alone at his family home after his parents separated. That's when he picked up Stephen Hicks, a friendly hitchhiker heading to a rock concert. They drank beer, listened to music, talked for hours. But when Hicks said he had to leave, something snapped. Dahmer didn't want to lose him. He grabbed a dumbbell, hit him from behind, and strangled him. It wasn't planned. But once it happened, Jeffrey felt something powerful, something addicting. He said later, "It gave me a sense of total control." Hicks became his first victim, the first of many. And now that he'd crossed the line, there was no going back. Exact time, date, and location of murder? The murder happened on Sunday evening, June 18th, 1978, between 5:30 and 7 p.m. The location? The basement of Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood home at 4480 West Bath Road, Bath Township, Ohio. The house was isolated, surrounded by woods, perfect for hiding secrets. Hicks was killed in silence. No one heard the screams. No one suspected the horror unfolding beneath that suburban roof. And for 13 years, that home kept its secret. Until Dahmer confessed, no one knew that the first blood had been spilled right there. And what he did with the body next was even more horrifying. Who was the victim? Stephen Mark Hicks was just 18 years old, a kind, music-loving teenager from Coventry Township, Ohio. That day, he was on his way to a concert when he accepted a ride from a stranger. He didn't know that stranger would be his last. Friends described him as cheerful, funny, and full of life. He had plans, dreams. He wanted to be a teacher one day. His parents reported him missing when he didn't return home, but the case went cold. For years, Stephen was just a face on a missing poster. Until 1991, when his killer finally confessed. But Stephen's death wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a bloody legacy. What was the method of murder? Dahmer's method was brutally simple. He waited until Hicks was relaxed, distracted, then struck him twice in the back of the head with a 10-pound dumbbell. When Hicks collapsed, he used the bar to strangle him until he stopped moving. The killing was silent, efficient, but what followed was more disturbing. Dahmer stripped the body, stared at it, admitted he was aroused. He kept the body overnight, then began cutting it up. The murder wasn't fueled by anger, it was fueled by obsession, control, possession. The act wasn't just about killing, it was about keeping. And when the body lay lifeless, Dahmer's real work began. What was the murder planning? Officially, it wasn't planned, but mentally, it was years in the making. Jeffrey had been fantasizing about controlling a person for years. This was just the moment he acted. He didn't have tools ready, just raw impulse. But the way he handled the aftermath showed calculation. He dismembered the body, used acid to dissolve flesh, and crushed the bones with a hammer. It was meticulous. He flushed some remains, hid others in the woods. The cover-up was clinical, precise, like he'd rehearsed it in his mind over and over. It may not have been pre-planned, but it was executed with chilling control. And the way he cleaned up was just the start of his sinister blueprint. What was the look, outfit, and dialogue of the killer at the time of murder? That night, Dahmer looked like any normal teen. Blue jeans, a white t-shirt, and casual sneakers. His face emotionless, calm. But behind that still face, rage and obsession boiled. When Hicks stood to leave, Dahmer's voice was quiet. "Don't go." That was the last thing Hicks ever heard. There was no shouting, no screaming, just the cold swing of metal, followed by silence. Afterward, Dahmer didn't cry, didn't panic. He sat beside the body, touching it, studying it. His face never changed, There was no remorse, just fascination. That blank stare would become the face of America's most terrifying killer. But this wasn't a one-time event. It was only chapter 1. What did the killer do after the murder? Jeffrey Dahmer did not panic immediately after the murder. He hid Stephen Hicks's body in his basement. He sat next to the body all night, sometimes with fear, sometimes with curiosity, and sometimes with a twisted peace. The next morning, he began dismembering the body with a cold mind. He picked up a kitchen knife, separated the limbs, made a plan to put the flesh in acid, dissolved the flesh, separated the bones, and crushed them with a sledgehammer. He put bone fragments into plastic bags and threw them into the wood, flushed the flesh or threw it down the drain, cleaned the entire place with bleach. When his parents returned home, they did not know anything. After the murder, he went to college as if nothing had happened. But that night, Jeffrey was no longer just a boy. He had become a serial killer. But when so much was hidden, did anyone see anything? How did the killer destroy the evidence? Dahmer destroyed everything so cleanly that even the forensic team could not find the evidence even after years. He dismembered Hick's body and dissolved the flesh with acid. He had made the acid in a container which he had hidden in the basement. When the flesh was in liquid form, he flushed it. The bones were chopped so small with a sledgehammer that they could not even be identified. That bone powder was put into the wood. The murder weapon, the dumbbell, was cleaned with bleach. Blood stains were scrubbed. Not a single fingerprint, clothing, or even a hair strand was left. Jeffrey put on gloves, sealed the bags tightly. And the biggest thing, he didn't say anything to anyone. An explanation that would shock the mind of a trained killer, not an 18-year-old. But did anyone see anything strange around Jeffrey that day? Or was everyone keeping quiet? Was blood or body parts found at the scene of murder? When Jeffrey Dahmer confessed in 1991, the police investigated his house in Bathurst. But by that time, 13 years later, no physical evidence was found. No bloodstains, no body parts. There was not even the smell of bleach in the basement. Everything had been cleaned up. Even Hick's flesh, bones, and belongings had been destroyed. Dahmer explained in detail how he dismembered the bodies, dissolved them in acid, and crushed the bones. Nature had done its work in the woods where the bone fragments were thrown. Rain, insects, and time had destroyed everything. The forensic team had to rely only on his words. Everything was over, except for a confession. But was Jeffrey alone at the time of the murder? Or did someone come close to the truth? He was the witness of the murder. There was no witness to the murder of Stephen Hicks. Jeffrey Dahmer did not plan the murder, but when he acted, he covered it up from every angle. When Hicks was picked up, he was on an isolated road. No CCTV, no traffic, nothing. He went back home and committed the murder in the basement where there was no one. The neighbors also had no idea of any strange smell or sound. At that time, Dahmer's parents had separated. Jeffrey was completely alone in the house. When Stephen Hicks's parents filed a missing report, the police scanned the entire town, but no witness was found. Jeffrey behaved so normally that no one doubted him, neither the college students nor anyone in the army. For 13 years he kept that murder a secret, for which there was no witness, until Dahmer himself confessed in front of the police. Stephen Hicks was just a missing boy, about whom there was no trace. And when no one saw him, then did the killer go straight back home after the murder?